newsagents.
Marjorie Diana Nicholson, 77.
Freedom for choice of smokers.
John David Albury,
Natural Law
70.
Party.
Ian Ferres Pearson,
Labour.
28,400. And Graham Eric Postle,
Conservative.
7,706. I hereby declare that Ian Ferres Pearson has been duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for the Dudley West constituency.
I know you're thinking we've screwed up on the newsagents, that we've played out the wrong by-election result. No, it wasn't Tamworth. No, it wasn't Mid-Beds. It was Dudley West in the winter of 1994. The by-election that told us that something seismic was happening in British politics. If the US Geological Survey could have measured what happened that night, it would have been a 7 in terms of earthquakes. But what happened last night in Tamworth and Mid-Beds was a 9. It was exceptional what happened. The Labour victories are huge. And in the 92 to 97 Parliament, Ken Clarke once said that you keep thinking you've hit rock bottom only to find you can go even lower. And arguably, the Conservatives are in that position now. This is John. Welcome to the Newsagents.
Strathern, Alistair Luke, Labour Party, 13,872. I therefore duly declare Alistair Luke Strathern elected as Member of Parliament for the Mid-Bedfordshire Parliamentary Constituency.
Edwards, Sarah Sienna, Labour Party, 11,719 votes. And I do hereby declare that Sarah Sienna Edwards is duly elected.
Tonight, the people of Tamworth have voted for Labour's positive vision and a fresh start.
Each of those results is extraordinary. It's history in the making. The party of the future, the party of national renewal, is this changed Labour Party. So we go forward. Thank you so much. An incredible result.
That is Keir Starmer in Labour Mid-Bedfordshire. Yeah, Labour Mid-Bedfordshire. A seat that has been Conservative for nearly 100 years has now changed hands in a really spectacular by-election, not just because Labour won it, but because it was also a three-way fight which made it seem like the Tories would be the favourite to come through the middle and somehow hold the seat as Labour and Liberal Democrats fought each other. The Labour MP, Alistair Strathern, is probably not going to be there for very long. It's hard to imagine that he will hold on to Mid-Bedfordshire at the general election. If he does, oh my God, we're talking election wipeout for the Conservative Party. He had a narrow majority of about 1,200, I should say, over his Tory rival. Emma Holland-Lindsay, the Liberal Democrat candidate, was third in with 9,420. In terms of size of the majority that Nadine Dorries had at the last election, well, it was 24,000 or something ridiculous. It was absolutely huge. And then we had the Tamworth result in the so-called Red Wall Midlands. And that as well was equally astonishing, just in terms of the size of the swing that allowed Labour to take that seat as well. And again, an enormous victory for Labour. Neither of these seats, Tamworth or Mid-Beds, are in anything like on the target list of seats that Labour need to win a general election. It all went way beyond that. And so I do think it is not hyperbolic to talk about these being the most extraordinary set of by-election results that I think anyone can remember. I'm joined in the studio, as we are on times like this, by Lara Spirit, the editor of Redbox at the Times newspaper. And you're looking a little bleary-eyed and looking as though... I always like to make our guests feel very comfortable and warm, and you look like you've been up all night. You have.
Yeah, I've got a face for radio today, I think it's fair to say. Yeah.
What do you make of it?
I mean, it is an extraordinary set of by-election results, I think, and it's difficult to speak to anyone who denies their significance. Of course, I think just two facts, one from each, stand out to anybody that was waking up to this news this morning. In Tamworth, the second biggest swing from the Conservatives to Labour at any by-election since the Second World War, and Mid-Bedfordshire, the largest numerical majority overturned at a by-election. You have to go back, as I did this morning, to 1962 to find a day when the Conservatives lost two by-elections to Labour on a single day. Now, even on that day, it was arguably not as bad because the Conservatives held some other by-election seats. But that was, of course, just a couple of years before Harold Wilson came in to Downing Street with that election victory in 1964. And indeed, he came in with a slogan of 13 wasted years, a slogan not dissimilar to that you hear Keir Starmer use currently, and Starmer in his own speech referencing that particular election victory. So certainly fair to say that these are two very significant by-election results. I think, we're used to seeing double losses for the Conservatives in recent years in by-elections. We had them in June 2022. Of course, we also had them lose two in July. But in July, they held on to Uxbridge, of course, and that was seen as the silver lining. Whereas at this point, it's very hard to find anybody this morning who says that this could be in any way good news for the Conservatives. Now, some who I've spoken to in the Tory party will say a few things in their defence. They will say that the Labour vote was weaker than the Tory vote being lost, i.e. the Tories were more unpopular.
The Labour vote didn't go up that much. It was just that all the Tory voters stayed at home.
Exactly. And also, interestingly, coming from a Conservative that wants to see them do well, the vote share for Reform UK was greater than the Labour majority in both of the seats. I think to their mind, that means that perhaps in a general election, those voters who might be more protest inclined might come back into the fold. The other point to note is, of course, that turnout was down in these elections. Are those people staying away that are more likely to vote Conservative? Well, some loyal Tories that you speak to this morning will insist so.
So you mentioned Uxbridge there, and Uxbridge it felt even at the time, an outsized effect on Conservative Party thinking, in that it almost reshaped their strategy of how they were going to fight. And, Rishi Sunak announcing that he was kind of rowing back on some of the stiffer measures towards reaching net zero, following the whole kind of ULEZ thing, and that was the kind of bandwagon. It makes Uxbridge look more like an outlier now rather than something significant on which Tories can build policy.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. These results mean that there have been 8 20 percentage point by-election swings in the last 3 years, 5 of them in the last 3 months. So in that sense, Uxbridge perhaps does look like an outlier, although Tories that you speak to will say, actually, when you look at some of the polling around those net zero measures, some of that did quite well, that actually, if you go into an election campaign, you still have a lot of time to try and persuade people of their merits, of your merits. Of course, Rishi Sunak's big pitch to be the change candidate, I think, does look slightly more difficult to land as a result of this morning's by-elections, not least because after the conference we saw no discernible bounce for the party. We also saw his own approval ratings as low as they ever have been.
I mean, I bet you there are an awful lot of Conservative MPs who are opening up their laptops this morning and thinking, where is that file with my CV on it? I wonder whether I ought to be updating it because I might be looking for a new job.
Well, as you said, I think both of these seats are very difficult to see how in any normal election year you would be able to hold them. The Conservatives will most likely win these seats back in the next election. It would be completely extraordinary if they didn't. But Frank Luntz, that kind of great American pollster has said, I think before the Conservative Party conference, that any Tory MP with a majority of less than 8,000 should be thinking about looking for a new job. Now, I spoke to a number of Tory MPs who were quite happy to admit that they were sort of casually doing just that when I put that question to them at a conference.
Well, they're getting the CVs up to date.
A senior Conservative MP that I spoke to earlier on in the week said that actually it might be nicer to lose their seat in the coming election because they could take a break. They don't necessarily want to be around for what comes next. They're not interested in the kind of fight back for the Conservative Party. They'd rather come back into Parliament when they've got themselves into better shape and potentially in a much more electable form, as they might be immediately after a big drubbing defeat when there'll be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of kind of internecine blaming.
So what does number 10 do? you've relaunched the strategy that Rishi is the change candidate, which they did in Manchester 3 weeks ago. It doesn't seem to be working. It feels to me, and I was a political correspondent then, like it was in 1996, where John Major is desperately hoping that something, anything, comes along that will change his fortunes because Labour is forging ahead. And this, in terms of these by-elections and the figures that you're talking about, are much more like 96, 97 than they were 91, 92.
Yeah, so Conservatives that you'll talk to who remain optimistic, or at least think that they're in with a fighting chance, will cite the 92 general election and not the 97 general election,
of course,
as evidence that actually it's possible for the polls to narrow, it's possible for you not to win. But I think in that key instance, 92 was very much a presidential campaign. You had a great campaign video of John Major going around
in Brixton,
where he was
going back to where
exactly
he grew up. Yeah.
He was seen as the strong point in that. I think the recent dip in Rishi Sunak's personal approval ratings make that strategy difficult. So I think you're right to say that.
Also, the polling evidence, if you compare polls 91, 92 to now, I mean, they're nothing that's like each other. There were a lot more polls that were absolutely had Labour and Conservatives neck and neck in the run-up to the 92 election, whereas everything we're seeing at the moment shows Labour is still forging well ahead, and by-elections to prove it.
So I think there are two things that Conservatives will say to you when you say that it is a grim inevitability that they might lose the next election, if that's what you believe. They will say, actually, we could see the economy pick up if we see inflation fall, which is, of course, Rishi Sunak's number one priority, one that he set out at the beginning of the year. Then you can say to people, look, don't trust Labour with the recovery. It's a very delicate thing. It's something Rishi has worked very hard at. He's a very clever man, and he is the one that you can trust to see that through. It's something they focused on a huge amount, and something that you'll hear him and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, talk about a huge amount in the run-up to the Autumn Statement and thereafter. The second is on small boats, and I think this is something that will come back into the news in a very big way quite soon. Of course, we're expecting the Supreme Court ruling on Rwanda soon. Now, there is a clear dividing line between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party on this particular issue, and it's one that the leading Conservatives think is a very electorally salient one. Now, you might disagree, but this is what a number of them say, and they will say that actually, if the Supreme Court say that it's legal, but even if they don't, and it comes into wider legal dispute, that if you can get some flights up and running, Keir Starmer has said, he said at Labour conference recently, even in a situation where the Rwanda scheme isn't working, we're going to scrap it. And Rishi Sunak's team will say, well, that is a very clear dividing line that we have. You're saying that in a situation where a scheme that we have that looks like it's working, it's, again, one of his key priorities, the fifth priority, to stop the boats, you're saying that you're not going to do that. And indeed, Keir Starmer, when he did make that semi-recent intervention on small boats, he said that he would look to be working more closely with the European Union. He wanted to treat, people who make those crossings possible as basically as traffickers, and that they would be penalised as such. Now, that was, I think, something that some people close to Starmer will admit was quite a difficult few days, because, of course, there were those responses immediately saying, well, actually, you'll have to accept a quota with the European Union if you want to deal with them. So I think, that is something that will be another big issue for them. And that's one of the reasons why they think the election might not be lost if you could fight it on either boats or the economy.
Right. And I want to come to the election timing, because you had a great story this morning, I think, that there has been a warning that you can't have a general election next October, November, because that would clash with the US presidential election, and you can't have two of the Five Eyes countries, i.e. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Britain and America, in elections at the same time because of cybersecurity risks.
So officials have warned some in government that there could be huge security risks were you to have a situation where both the US and the UK held concurrent contests. So obviously the US election to be held on the 5th of November, there is a nervousness in government, especially given how close that US election looks like it could be, especially given the possible risk that it could be contested, that actually it was worth saying, and that it had been routine advice, that their security risk was such that you would not want to see those two overlap. Now, the last year in which they overlapped was 1992. The last year in which the campaigns overlapped was 1964. So this is not something that is common, but actually, obviously, we know Rishi Sunak recently ruled out a earlier general election.
Cybersecurity risks were slightly less in 1964 than they are now.
Well, exactly. And, I think the point being that Rishi Sunak has had to rule out holding an early election. It's widely expected to be in the autumn. Now, you don't need to have it in November in the autumn. You can have it in October. If you have it in October, you then have a very realistic question about your party conferences, which of course are a very big source of income, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, an important source of income. Does Rishi Sunak want to forego those conferences, or does he want to pull some MPs who will be defending their seats and will have to be fighting tooth and nail to defend their seats to come to the party conference and support him and his wider agenda there? I think that would create some difficult questions. So it's an interesting dilemma.
Lara, fabulous. Thank you. You can sleep now.
Thank you.
We're going to hear from the three main parties very shortly for their reactions to the results. But for the Liberal Democrats, this was prime territory on which to get a bandwagon rolling, to come, as they've done in so many by-elections before, to come through and steal it away. They didn't. And I'm joined now by Daisy Cooper. She is the MP for St Albans, neighbouring Mid-Beds. Daisy Cooper, what went wrong?
In Mid-Bedfordshire, well, we're clearly disappointed. We had had these 4 stunning by-election wins in other parts of the country. We were really hoping to replicate that in Mid-Bedfordshire. But as it turned out, it became a 3-way fight. But we're really proud of the fact that we have doubled our share of the vote. And we've proven once again that we can win over the support and votes of lifelong Conservative voters. We did that right across Mid-Bedfordshire, but particularly in some of those rural villages. And if we can replicate that again at a future general election, then I think we can be instrumental to hopefully beating the Conservatives when the general election comes.
What happened to the Lib Dem bandwagon? If ever there was a seat that was ripe for that bandwagon to roll, it was Mid-Bedfordshire. Largely rural seat. I would have thought Labour would have had very little chance in it. And yet, Labour won.
Well, we always knew, and we said all along, that it was going to be a really tall order to try and come from third to win that seat. It always is a tall order to come from third
but the Lib
to
Dem,
win.
That's what you do. That's what you do. By-elections are your forte. You're able to pour the resources in, get that momentum going, pavement politics, all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, I think that we did manage to get a huge amount of momentum. And as I say, we managed to double our vote share. That's not an insignificant achievement. If you look at the other political parties, neither the Conservatives or Labour did manage to increase their vote share overall. So I think what you can see is that we have managed to make huge progress there. We've been sort of instrumental in helping to defeat the Conservatives in this by-election.
Look, you're being very on message and you're being the party spokesperson, and I know all of that. This is a podcast. We want to talk about the politics of this. I mean, I thought it was fascinating. What happened in this by-election was that there was no non-aggression pact with you and the Labour Party. You both went for it. Ed Davey has said that if the Tories are the biggest single party at the next election, the Liberal Democrats are not going to help them form another government. Therefore, the implication of that is that obviously you'd like there to be a Liberal Democrat government. That's not going to happen. The only alternative is a Labour government. Why did you and the Labour Party fight each other in Mid-Beds?
Well, there have never been any non-aggression pacts at all. I mean, there really haven't been any pacts. I mean,
no, not pacts, but there have been quiet understanding that we will let you you're the best place to win this seat. We're not going to put in much effort. You're the best place to win that seat. We won't put in much effort.
Well, and that's because under our first past the post system, there's normally only 2 parties that can win particular seats. And there's normally a very clear challenger to the incumbent. And what we've seen in the last 4 by-elections that the Liberal Democrats have won, we were the key challenger challengers in those seats. And we felt as though we were the key challengers in Mid-Bedfordshire as well.
But even though you'd come third?
Even though we'd come third, because that happened in some of the by-elections as well. You recall that amongst those 4 by-elections, there were at least 2 seats where we had come from third to win. And it's because of the nature of the kind of seat that it was. But clearly we found that in Mid-Bedfordshire in the end, Labour campaigned very hard, particularly in the towns, in places like sort of Flitwick and Ampthill. And we were campaigning hard across the constituency, but got a lot more support in the rural villages. And that's ended up, there was healthy competition between, all 3 parties, and you can see the results.
But if you want the Tories out at the next election, doesn't it behove you? I know there's not going to be any formal pact between the Liberal Democrats and Labour, but to kind of work out a way where it's a nod and a wink, and you say to one another, right, okay, look, you're best placed to win this one, we'll stand back a bit, and vice versa. Don't you think that would be good?
I don't think we really need it. So, as you know, the Liberal Democrats are in second place to the Conservatives in around 80 seats around the country. Yep. And for voters in those constituencies, it's really clear to them who the key challengers are. So by-elections are a slightly different kettle of fish, right? Because every political party can throw everything at a particular seat. But in a general election, we're all fighting in lots of different places across the country. And we've said very clearly we're going to put our resources into targeting those seats where we're in second place to the Conservatives in those 80 seats around the country. So I think voters can make their own minds up. If they want to vote tactically, they can see who the key challenger is. But sometimes people want to vote positively for a particular party or a particular candidate. So we always run positive campaigns on issues around NHS, cost of living, etc. So I don't think that the result in Bedfordshire ultimately affects what we're going to be doing at the general election. All I know is that our job in the Lib Dems is to really make sure that we are targeted in the places that we can really win and where we can win seats off the Conservative MPs.
Daisy Cooper, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And after the break, we'll be talking to the Shadow Cabinet member, Peter Kyle. And he was on the newsagents a few weeks ago with Emily, describing how furious he was with the Liberal Democrats and the way they had campaigned in Mid-Beds. We'll see if he's still angry on a night of spectacular victory for Labour. And sitting in the studio is, I think it's not unfair to say, a bleary-eyed Peter Kyle, Shadow Cabinet member, but who early on was tasked with masterminding the Mid-Bedfordshire campaign. And Peter Kyle, how are you?
Well, I didn't go to bed last night. I got 3 hours the night before that. When I get stressed, I'm usually quite focused on the outside, and I come out with mouth ulcers, which I've got a mouthful of mouth ulcers at the moment as well, which just shows that we just, not just me but everyone else, we just gave this campaign absolutely everything. And then when we had the opportunity towards the end, we seized it with both hands, and we just worked absolutely round the clock, and we gave it absolutely everything we could when we had the opportunity right there at the end. So yeah, so I'm pretty worn out, but I'm looking forward to a weekend of sleep now.
But presumably on cloud 9.
I'm completely over the moon. We all are. There were lots of tears yesterday because we knew from the outset that this was possible, but we knew there was a very, very narrow window of opportunity, and we could do it if we made no mistakes. And thanks to the team, I mean, the Labour Party team is absolutely next level to anything I've ever experienced in political campaigning before. So you have all these individual skilled people on digital, on print, on strategy, on field operations, and we added up to a more than the sum of our parts, and that's where the magic happens in campaigning. Everything had to be different in this. This was a very unconventional by-election, and I sensed it, we sensed it on day one, and I think looking back, we were the only party that ran an unconventional campaign. The Lib Dems were running their Somerset and Frome, their standard campaign.
To try to get a bandwagon running.
Well, it was just smash the Tories, smash, crash, bang, wallop. We're here, unsubtle, taking real license with facts, all that kind of stuff. Just steamrolling in a sense of incredible entitlement that we're the Lib Dems, we're here, choose us, come to us. Then you had the Tories that were all over the place for ages, very low key, and then suddenly decided to kick in with a Uxbridge style campaign to find one single issue and tell electors that's what this campaign is about. But we did something that was unconventional in that we started the campaign by just listening, and we detected in the first days of this campaign that the Tory vote had imploded, and residents there had decided to leave the Tories. Therefore, what's the point of us going in with a heavy attack on the Tories? The Tories have done it for us. So this campaign had to be about being the most magnetic by having a candidate that was the most appealing, that reflected the values that they want in their Member of Parliament, and setting about defining this incredible candidate we had with Alistair Strathern and building a campaign, a local campaign on him, and then simultaneously using the foundations that Keir has laid for the party, and it all just came together very, very well.
Look, a conventional news interview now goes like this, which I say, yes, but you didn't really increase the Labour vote. All that happened was that the Tory vote collapsed. I just kind of want to ask a slightly different question, although address it by all means, which is, how can the campaigning like this in a by-election have any significance beyond the by-election?
Well, there's two questions there. The first is quite straightforward, that a smart campaign knows what the end game will look like by the time you get there. Of course, the Tory vote had collapsed. We knew that. We had the data on it. We knew where the votes, we knew which demographics had fled the Tories in the biggest numbers. We knew where they were going to, and we met them where they were going. We didn't just say, come to us.
Let me just interrupt that thought for a moment, and we'll come back to the second point as well in a minute. When polling closed last night at 10 o'clock, had you got in your mind what you thought had happened, or is it now we're in the lap of the gods? What text did you send Keir Starmer?
Firstly, any party could have seen what was happening there as we did. It's just smart politics, and the other parties, they're not operating in a smart way right now. As of last night, the challenge was, and I had lots of your colleagues calling me and texting saying, what's it like? What does it feel like? Tell us, because everybody wants to know the future before the future happens. And quite often in these situations, you can do it because our data is so robust and we can predict it, and we pretty much know where going into account, we will have an inkling of where it's going. But yesterday was, I come back to it, it was an unconventional by-election. So Tamworth was broadly Tory Labour fight. Rutherglen was SNP Labour fight. But this yesterday was, in our minds, was a Tory Labour fight. But we also knew that there was a very, very popular local independent candidate that would keep his deposit and actually probably do quite well. In one independent poll, had 19% of the vote. Reform were running. They would probably keep their deposit. They had another party of the alt-right running. They would probably keep their deposit. And then the Lib Dems came crash bang wallop into the middle of this, saying that, we're here, we're going to do really well. This is a seat for us. Labour stand aside. Voters come to us. We're here. So
are you really pissed off with the Liberal Democrats?
Can I come back to that after this? So we went into last night thinking, there's no reference points here. There's never been an election campaign in Mid-Bedfordshire. The Tories never did it. So they did their 2 mail-outs, but they never door-knocked. There's never been canvassing there. There's no data there. When we arrived, there was a tiny amount of data for us. We had to build it all up. So there's no reference points that we could go back to see what if this happens, this is what it means, because we've had history there. There was also multi-parties operating there. It wasn't a straight, by the end, it wasn't a straight battle between 2 parties. So there was so much uncertainty. We knew we had the highest vote share, but we didn't know where the rest of it would all fall, and we didn't know exactly where the turnout would be because there's no reference points. We didn't know what turnout was going to be like in a by-election in a seat like this.
So presumably, last night at 10 o'clock, polls close. What, does Keir Starmer message you? And tell us what happened.
Yeah, of course he did. Of course he texted. He texted how it's going. I've got the text here, and then my reply was, "I'm anxious." I then go on and just talk him through what all of our data says, I talk about why the data there's so much uncertainty in the data because of the number of different people standing who could credibly keep their deposit. And then I just say that there is a very credible pathway to us winning, but there is a lot of uncertainty. The second I have more, I'll let you know, providing I've not bitten my fingers off to the bone by then.
And what does Keir say?
He's grateful for the update. So look, Keir's, he's.
When you say he's grateful for the update, is he saying, is it expletive ridden?
Oh no! That's not Keir. Keir is Keir. Keir isn't a fundamentally different person in private as he is in public. He's down the line. He wants updates. He wants the unvarnished truth. He's a warm person, and he likes it being spoken to him in human terms, not just sort of dry facts all the time. But look, he was very helpful, and we had several exchanges yesterday when we saw how things were going. But it was a very unpredictable evening, and then suddenly the numbers started to come in our direction, and I can't tell you the sense of relief. And then we had to keep it buttoned down as a team very, very tightly because it could go anywhere. The count was a very unpredictable evening.
So you talked a minute ago about the Liberal Democrats crash bang walloping, and I remember you coming on the podcast, and I was away, but I remember listening to it vividly and exactly where I was when I heard the interview you did with Emily, and you really went after the Liberal Democrats and the way that they were campaigning and saying how personal they'd made it and how unpleasant it was. You seem really pissed off with the Liberal Democrats.
There's a few things that I've been reflecting on from this. The first I want to be really clear is I have never suggested the Lib Dems shouldn't have stood in this election. Let me just explain how we approached this. When Keir called me and asked me to go to Mid-Bedfordshire and just sense check what was going on there and to go up with a team of Labour staffers to just get a sense, we all went out and just started by listening to residents. We came back, got data for what we were experiencing, and the result was the Tory vote is collapsing. We don't quite know where it's going to go, but we were really certain they were open, very certain they were open for a conversation with Labour. They wanted to explore Labour first. Now, I made a decision in that very, very first week, which we all unanimously agreed with, that if the Tories were to lose, it would be to either Labour or the Lib Dems. So what we will not do is take out the Lib Dems. We won't attack them. We won't be personal. We won't even name them in our literature, our online activity, or anything we allow our activists to say. We went on week after week after week doing exactly the same. In fact, from the start of the campaign at the beginning of June to the polling day last night, we never mentioned the Lib Dems candidate or the Lib Dems at all in any of our online or physical activities. The Lib Dems came in because simply, if they had emerged as the logical party to fight this battle, we would have turned it off in a heartbeat. We're not in the business of wasting Labour Party members' money. I'm not in the business of spending so much time away from the place I love living in. I love living in Hove. I didn't do it because I don't like living in Hove. We did it because that community told us they wanted to explore Labour. And then the Lib Dems came in. They didn't listen. They did start collecting data, presumably, and our data is incredible, probably the most sophisticated of any party these days. They would have been seeing something along the lines of what we were seeing, which was most people were saying Labour, a few people saying Lib Dem, but they immediately launched a viscerally personal attack against our candidate, Alistair Strathern. They started lying about him, and it went on for week after week and week. I came to do this interview with you guys in August. There have been 3 months of this before I said anything. And the point came to the point where I had to, as the political lead for this campaign, I had to show our candidate, Alistair, that I was going to protect him, that I was going to stick up for him, which is why I came and did the interview here, just so I could blow the whistle and let him and the campaign and all the volunteers that were experiencing this filth coming from that party day after day, just to show them that I was going to stick up for them.
So in answer to my question about whether you were pissed off with the Liberal Democrats, the answer is yes.
So why would I not be angry about that? It's not so The other thing was, it was politically stupid, because that was a community that had experienced the worst of politics. The worst of politics. That's why they'd fled the Tories, not just Nadine Dorries. They'd seen what was going on with the government, and it wasn't good enough. It didn't match their standards as a community. So why go piling in with something which matched the negatives that they had experienced with the Tories? Lying, sneering, innuendo, attack. No conversation, just absolute puerile, visceral, unrelenting negativity. And I couldn't understand it, but what I couldn't understand is why they were doing it to us. I can understand on their terms why they do it against the Tories, but even up to the eve of poll yesterday, almost all of their activity was aimed at Labour and not anywhere else. So,
what sort of lies are you talking?
Well, they said that he wasn't living in the constituency for months after he was living in the constituency. So Alistair, our great candidate, was living in Shefford, and every morning he was getting leaflets through his own door telling him he didn't live there. Week after week. So we have to send a legal note to them to say, you've got to stop doing this or we'll take action. So, of course, they stop it. At least they still use innuendo and sneering. Labour's London candidate and shipped in from London but now living here. But at least it's honest. At least it's truthful to residents about what they're saying. And I'm fine with that. Absolutely fine with it. But
do you
understand.
hope that come the general election, there will be a little more understanding, maturity? Has Ed Davey spoken to Keir Starmer about it? Or
I don't know. Labour Party didn't need to go into a dark room in Westminster to know that us spending a lot of money in Somerton and Froome would have been a waste of money. It was smart politics for us to do what we did there. What they did how the Lib Dems acted in Mid-Bedfordshire was dumb politics, and I don't think this country needs any more dumb politics. I think we've had enough of it. And I'm starting to wonder what the hell the purpose of the Lib Dems are now. Because, look, take them on their own terms. They came in at the start of this and said, this is a Lib Dem patch. Only the Lib Dems can win here. Labour can't win here. It's rural. Labour can't win here. They've never won here before. They didn't even win it in 1997. This is the sort of place that Lib Dems win, and they got a headline out of it because the media went along with this. We always knew, because the data was distinctly telling us it was a Labour-Tory battle. So we ignored it. But they went on doing that, and then right to the very end. So now I ask myself, what's the purpose? They've done this. They've built up the expectations that only they can do this. They have now blown their reason for being. So I think a lot of people in some of these parts of the country, in Yorkshire and other parts of the country and in the southeast, southwest, that would traditionally go to the Lib Dems because they don't think the Labour Party can win. This isn't about Labour Party. This is about voters now looking at Mid-Bedfordshire and saying, what's the point of the Lib Dems? Do we need a gateway political drug?
Okay, so let's go wider. What lessons do we draw? Does this have any significance for the general election? As you sit here now, Peter Kyle, can you say Labour are on course for a general election victory and a clear majority in the House of Commons?
I would say that a pathway to that happening is clearly one of the options before us if we choose to stay the course and deliver it. If I could just tell you what I think fundamentally happened in this election that delivered the outcome it did, and I can tell it with a story because I went into we were in a village, one of the villages in Mid-Bedfordshire. I saw a village hut, a wooden hut, community hut centre in one of these villages. I walked in, and there on the wall was a set of murals that kids in the local village, a traditional English village, thatched cottages, a pub, a green. It really was the most beautiful place, and it is the most beautiful place, and new build as well. Went in, and one of the murals on the wall is British values, as done by children in this local village. Those traditional values, all around the outside, are pictures of the royal family going from the King to George V, patriotism, institutions, and all in the middle were the values in names. So the first one at the top, law and order, understanding that rules matter. The next one going along, be kind. The next one, understand the difference between right and wrong. The next one, include everyone, with a little pride flag. I looked at this and I was stunned, because there, in this children's mural, was the most sophisticated analysis of our political landscape as a country right now. Because Those values were once associated with the governing party, the Conservative Party, and probably all the way through the history of that community voting Tory, it was recognisably aligned with Tory values. But rule of law, we've got a government that's broken international law and domestic law. Standards, understanding the difference between right and wrong. Tell the truth was one of the values. We just had Boris Johnson be inclusive with the pride flag. We've just seen Suella Braverman, a government minister, launching a war against these values. So the Tory party has ripped itself away from that. And what's happened instead? The Labour Party, with Keir Starmer, aligning itself almost perfectly with them. On the one hand, law and order. On the other, the institutions and patriotism. And then using a language which unites and is inclusive. All of those values are right there. So the Labour Party, I would argue, has aligned itself with what most people in Britain would associate with British values. And that is the fundamental reason why we won. And we're able to win in Mid-Bedfordshire. And that answers your broader question, that I think that is what will unlock some shocking victories for Labour, potentially, because in parts of the country which don't align themselves with Tory values anymore, I think they'll see a very, very comfortable fit with the Labour Party if we get local campaigns and the national campaign right.
Psephologists are saying it could be 530 Labour seats at the next election on the basis of what happened last night.
I think there are a credible pathway to some really quite outlandish, ambitious settlements, and just how far we can capitalise on that and just how far the Tories will allow us to capitalise on that is yet to be seen, because whilst Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are putting in all of the hard work to prepare a programme for government, the Conservative Party is putting in all of the hard work to prepare for opposition.
Peter Kyle, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, since recording that interview with Peter Kyle, we have gone back to the Liberal Democrats to put to them what he said to us, and we have a statement from the Liberal Democrats, and let me read it to you without any varnish on it at all. They did not take legal action. We did not tell any lies. Peter, go and have a long hot bath, an early night, and then hopefully you can enjoy your result. Well, let's get a Conservative perspective on last night's by-election results. Robin Walker, who is the Tory MP for Worcester, had been campaigning in Mid-Beds. What on earth went wrong when you have a majority of 25,000? There's never been a by-election like it.
Well, there have, of course, been a number of other by-elections with big swings over the years. But I'm not. This was a tough night, undoubtedly. A lot of our voters stayed at home, having been knocking on doors. A lot of people were angry about the way in which their last MP had left, and upset and understandably across saying they wouldn't vote for us this time. But actually, an awful lot of people were also saying that in a general election they might behave differently. And I think it is something that we have to listen to the concern and the feedback that's there, but also recognise that by-elections are exceptional things. And in this case, it didn't go the way we wanted. I think we had an excellent candidate and a strong ground campaign from what I saw. But I think understandably, many people in Mid-Beds were incredibly frustrated about the fact this by-election was happening in the first place.
So it's Nadine's fault?
No, partly. I'm not saying that entirely, but of course, we've got to recognise the circumstances in which it arose. And I think what is striking is at the same time, on the same day, we've had by-elections in 2 local council seats in Worcester, which is a seat that Labour need to win a general election, in which they have come 3rd and 4th. I think what it reflects is there's not some great enthusiasm for Labour at this point, excitement about them coming in. What there is a mood of frustration, and I think we have to engage with that. We have to show that we have solutions. I do think the Prime Minister's priorities, and particularly the focus on tackling inflation, are the right ones, but I think we have to show delivery on those in order to win people back and show competence as a party.
Can I gently suggest that maybe that is a tad complacent when you've had 2 of the biggest by-election wins by Labour since God knows when?
I accept that these wins are a concern for the party. We need to engage and we need to listen. But I think there are an awful lot of voters out there who are prepared to engage with us and not excited about the prospect of a Labour government. And I think that's what I've been hearing from businesses I've been engaging with today. I think it's what's reflected in wider voting patterns, and the fact that the last time we saw a swing of this scale was actually only about a year ago, but it was to the Liberal Democrats rather than to Labour in the Chesham by-election, doesn't suggest that we're in a 97 style situation, I have to say.
You're standing down at the next election, aren't you, in Worcester?
I am, and I think we have an excellent candidate in Mark Bayliss who will be well placed to fight the seat. So, but I think it is something that actually what we have seen locally is a big shift in voting patterns, but it's one that is primarily benefiting other parties like the Greens and the Liberal Democrats rather than necessarily the Labour Party. And the Conservatives remain in first or second place in almost every council seat in the city. So that is something that I think gives us a good platform on which to build and to win back seats next year at the local elections. And that's certainly something I'll be supporting the association in doing.
Sure. I just wonder whether if you had total confidence that the Conservatives were going to hold the seat of Worcester, you might have just been fighting the election again.
I set out my reasoning on that a year ago. It is primarily because of family reasons that I'm stepping down, and the reality is, having fought 5 general elections, I think I've done my piece here. But I think it is certainly something that I think the party is in a strong place to be able to win in a place like Worcester, to be able to win back the council, and to be able to put up a strong candidate. Clearly, we need to listen to the concerns that have been raised in these by-elections and in others recently, and show real delivery for the public in order to do that. And there's absolutely no room for any complacency in that respect. What I don't buy, though, is this narrative that people are wildly enthusiastic about a Labour alternative, which the turnout figures from these recent by-elections just don't suggest that they are.
Robin Walker, grateful to you. Thanks very much for being with the newsagents today. Before we go, on the other side of the glass, in the studio where I'm sitting right now, are my production team, and they've told me they've got a clip that they want to end the podcast with, and they won't tell me what it is. The bastards.
It's day one of the honeymoon. Arrived in Colorado yesterday, and I've spent the evening watching the by-election results. And in a way, I don't think that there's a bit better way to get your honeymoon started. There's drama, there's excitement, thrills, spills. Does that make sense? Probably shouldn't say that. Anyway, my wife, very patient lady, fell asleep and I watched the by-election results. And I know, John, that you're all alone, and you're not used to being alone on a Friday. You need someone to hold your hand. So I thought I would, just in true John Sopel style, send a few quick thoughts from the Mountain State, which is actually the perfect place, the Centennial State, I should say, the actual perfect place on mountain time to watch a British by-election from. Can be asleep, by 10:30. Absolutely fantastic. Few thoughts. This is a seismic result for the Labour Party and for the Conservative Party. And it basically reaffirms, of course it would, what we were saying on the newsagents in the aftermath of the Selby and Uxbridge by-election results, which is that far, far too much attention was paid in the Westminster Village by the press, and frankly, I suspect by Conservative MPs, and certainly by Downing Street, though you can understand that more, to Uxbridge, and not nearly enough to Selby. Uxbridge, as we said at the time, was sui generis. It was a particular set of circumstances which led to that result. Everyone should have been looking at Selby, which was a massive swing to the Labour Party, and they should have been looking before that at Somerton and Frome, which was a huge result for the Lib Dems. And what you can see from these results, and I think what you're probably seeing in terms of Conservative MPs waking up this morning looking at these results, is a long, sober intake of breath, which is not something I'm going to be doing a lot of on this honeymoon, but a long, sober intake of breath, thinking, what on earth do we do now? Because they might just be realising, waking up to the fact that something that has been underpriced in Westminster for some time has been the possibility of a Conservative wipeout. Not Labour just sneaking in, not a hung parliament, but all of the circumstances, the volatility that we've seen in the electorate time and time again in recent years coming together to produce a wipeout for the Conservative Party on 1997 levels, or even, according on the basis of these results and some of the results we saw in the local elections, exceeding 1997 levels. Will that cause volatility in the Conservative Party? Maybe. But then again, it's not as if they've got an alternative strategy. It's not as if they've got an alternative leader waiting in the wings. They are just going to, I suspect, although you can't be sure, suck it and see and wait and hope that something turns up. And again, to something reaffirming we've been saying on the newsagents for a while, the possibility of the likelihood of a December 2024 or even a January 2025 general election is just going up and up and up all the time. One other thing as well, this also in a way that you could never have anticipated a few years ago shows that Brexit has lost all of its salience, or nearly all of its salience, in a way we would never have anticipated in 2019 or even in 2021 after the Hartlepool by-election, which the Conservatives won against Labour in the middle of the Parliament. You would never have thought then that the realignment that looked like it was going to be permanent would apparently not only be stopped in its tracks, but reversed. These results, coupled with the local election results, seem to show the Conservative Party undoing or having undone years and years worth of realignment in places like the West Midlands and the North, which preceded Brexit and which accelerated after Brexit as well. Anyway, my wife's waking up, so I should probably... hi, darling. Should probably leave it at that. John, don't worry. Emily's back on Monday. You're not going to be alone for much longer. I'm going to bring back those cowboy boots that you requested. See you very soon.
I have two thoughts, having had that sprung upon me by the producers. One, Goodall, we had all that bloody well covered. All the points you've just long-windedly made there, we did in the podcast. And my second thought is this. Who would want to be married to Lewis Goodall, that he does this on his honeymoon? I would have thought maybe there were one or two better things to be doing. See you next week.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.